Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha.
Okay. So as we begin our class on the Four Noble Truths, His Holiness starts with an introduction to the Four Noble Truths. And what I thought I would do this time around is take just some excerpts and spend a little time with them. I think in the West, we have a tendency to consume a lot of information. And so we read books, and we read a chapter, we read a section. Actually, pretty rarely does the introduction get read. But the opportunity with Buddhism is to understand that these teachings are really layered, and to unpack them takes a little bit of time. So there's a process of integrating these wisdom teachings with three wisdoms. First one's hearing the teaching, so receiving a teaching. First wisdom. So a lot of times we might go to a teaching, or we might read a book, and we get that information. And pretty quickly we might be actually on to some other information. So that first level of wisdom maybe doesn't really settle with us. And you can imagine trying to remember books you read in college today, or things that you learned even a week ago. So here we want to take a different approach. We take a little time to get a teaching, to get the information. And then the second wisdom is to analyze this teaching, to contemplate it, to analyze it, to pick it apart, to see if it makes sense. Does it hold up? And am I understanding it correctly? And if we take some time with that, then we have a little bit of realization, that teaching, something that's a little more ingrained in us. It makes sense. I have a sense of it in my life, how it applies to me, the world I'm experiencing. So that's the second wisdom. And then the third wisdom is to meditate on that bit of realization. So we can move it from just some information to a little bit of realization and understanding, to really an embodiment of understanding. And this approach we do many, many times. As we all know, you can pick up the same book that you read a year ago and have a very different experience with it. So rather than, as I like to say, reading 100 books, sometimes it can be a lot more powerful to read one book 100 times and really unpack its essence and see how it really speaks to us and how we can bring it into our lives. So with that in mind, we'll take a little time to go through the text and take a paragraph, take a little piece of pithy instruction, and see if we can't discuss it, bring it to that second level of wisdom. So I encourage you to, as we go through the text, make sure you read it, and any questions you have, any thoughts you have, that this becomes much more of a discussion than an actual just an unpacking or commentary on the teaching. So hopefully everyone has had the text, and we've read maybe some of the portion of the introduction to the Four Noble Truths. There's a bit in here that His Holiness, to prepare for the teachings, it's actually quite advanced information, but he was setting a context. This was a book that was taken out of some teachings that he gave in England. So we'll actually be going the other way around. We'll start with the introduction to the Four Noble Truths, and we'll go through the Four Noble Truths, and then we'll refer back to that preliminary information he gave, because it is really quite advanced. So just check in if anyone has any question here before we start. You can unmute, and hopefully you know how to mute and unmute. And if you have a question, no worries. You can also, I think, is there a raise a hand feature here? there is, might use that. Otherwise, just chime in. Don't be bashful. Okay, not hearing anything yet. So let's pull up the text. Now, I'm went through this section and I just picked out a few pieces here that I thought would be, pithy, important, key points as His Holiness introduces us to this teaching on the Four Noble Truths. So I can share a couple of those on the screen here. For those of you who've been getting teachings with me for a while, you're going to be a little shocked that I have a PowerPoint. Man, that's not what I want to share. Let's see. One moment. There we go. This will pop up. So right off the bat, His Holiness brings up this just basic truth. And the question is it a truth or not? Just because he says it's obvious and we don't need much explanation, but the truth is, happiness is something that we all aspire to achieve. And of course, we naturally have a right to fulfill that aspiration. And he says it very matter of fact. And, is that really true? Is this something we can take as a basis? Because this becomes the very basis of these teachings, that happiness is something we all aspire to achieve. And that he adds this piece here that we naturally have a right to fulfill that aspiration. Do you know anyone who doesn't seem to want happiness? Have you met that person? And, is it an inherent right? We may find that it sounds pretty straightforward. As a matter of fact, throughout the Enlightenment period, even in the Constitution of the United States, but even in the Enlightenment, these inalienable rights, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You'll find it embedded there in the Enlightenment philosophers, and foundational, even in the Constitution of the United States. So if we poke around a little bit, we might start to see that a lot of cultures, a lot of other civilizations really felt that this wasn't right for everyone. But then at the same time, you might see that that kind of right was denied to many people. So maybe they didn't hold that, and it took the Enlightenment to really kind of bring it out there. And even after that, many people upheld those ideas, and they put people in different categories as being less human and so forth. And so His Holiness is, putting down something that he thinks is just natural. It's just apparent. Not only do we all aspire for happiness, we all have the right to have it. And if we unpack that a little more, that means that we need to recognize that all others have this right. And sure, you might sit there and go, yeah, of course everyone does. And then start asking this next question: are there some people you'd rather not be happy? It might be in the minds of many of us thinking, well, there's a few people I know that maybe I don't think they should be so happy. I might even wish them ill. right here at the start, it's important to unpack what's being said here and look at our own minds. Pretty easy to agree with an idea, but in our hearts and minds, do we really believe that everyone has the right to this opportunity? And we might even know some people we don't even think are seeking it so much, right? So my invitation right here, start right here in the very introduction, is to notice in our own hearts and minds, do we sometimes feel that others don't deserve this? And then as we get into this text a little bit, we might recognize that just having that view that others don't deserve this might actually be limiting your own happiness, your own well-being. Sometimes pretty easy to just go through a sentence. Oh, of course. But what do we really think and feel about that? And the next point. And that suffering is something everyone wishes to avoid. And we also have the right to overcome suffering. So foundational right here in the Buddhist teachings. And it's not limited to humans. All beings seeking happiness, all beings seeking to avoid suffering. But he's adding this extra piece that they all have the right to overcome suffering. And so if we're going to take this as a working hypothesis, it means we need to explore it a bit. And we might even know some people that we think really enjoy suffering, right? I like to complain a lot. I like to tell you about their struggles. Might seem like they like suffering. Or it may very well be that talking about their suffering in some way attenuates it to some degree. So maybe they're just not very skillful with that. But the premise here in His Holiness's introduction is, why did the Buddha teach these teachings? And so I looked at the very nature of life, and is the very nature of life a movement towards seeking happiness and avoiding suffering. And I think if we explore that, I think the first part we may really get to recognize that to be true by going a little more deeply. Do we have some of our own thoughts around who deserves suffering, deserves happiness? So I think an important reflection there to notice that in our own minds, how we can very easily, at times, not only think some people don't deserve to not be happy, we actually looking forward to seeing them suffering. And then the next point is, oops, I guess I clicked ahead, didn't mean to. Just grab this right out of the text. The teachings on the Four Noble Truths provide an understanding of the relationships between two sets of events, causes and their effects. And so this is really going to be core here, causes and their effects. What are the causes for happiness? What are the causes for suffering? And do things just happen, or do we sit there and, I want happiness, but what am I doing to be happy? I want to avoid suffering. What am I doing to eliminate suffering? What are the true sources of happiness? What are the true sources of suffering? And here, throughout the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, is going to be a very basic, fundamental premise that things don't come from nowhere. Things don't come from nowhere. There's a cause and there's a effect. There's a cause and then there's a result. And core to it is going to be distinguishing between the causes that lead to some real happiness and the causes that lead to suffering. Distinguishing between those two. So the slide I have up here, my computer catches up with me, which may not. I think I may be frozen here. We'll see if I come back. Right at the core, the Buddha's noticed that in our quest for actual happiness, we're creating the causes of suffering. And so distinguishing between the actual causes of happiness and the actual causes of suffering is going to be critical to these teachings. So much of the Four Noble Truths then is simply going to be recognizing and understanding the causal relationship here and understanding the basic way that we are able to experience, to know anything, and how we're able to experience it. So a good deal of the way of the Four Noble Truths is really always going to be understanding this dynamic. But at the core, basic working hypothesis is going to be very simply that we are all seeking happiness, that we are all trying to avoid suffering. And the core root issue is that we don't understand this process and we don't understand who we are. Ignorance is the way it's presented. I like to say misperception or misunderstanding, and so that's core here. And then he goes into this important piece that I want to make sure I touch on while I'm still online. Is, why did the Buddha present this in a specific order? And I think that's, really critical because it's going to relate to cause and effect. And let me see if I can bring up that little PowerPoint again here without shutting down the whole system. So His Holiness brought up that the way it's taught is not the way it manifests, but rather it was a skillful approach for a very specific reason. And all right, I think we're doing much better this time. And he took this quote from a Buddhist teaching, and Maitreya, it's noted too. But just as a disease need be diagnosed, its cause eliminated, a healthy state achieved, and the remedy implemented, so also should suffering and its causes, its cessation, and the path be known, removed, attained, and undertaken. And so this becomes the skillful approach that we don't start with sufferings. Suffering arises out of causes and conditions, right? That's not how we start, but we start on the path of eliminating suffering by recognizing that we are. So recognizing the disease. And unless we really recognize the nature of suffering, the nature of dukkha, there's really no way to eliminate it. Just as pointed out here is, if we don't know we're sick, we're not going to take the steps to get well. So we really need to understand that first. And so the first noble truth, it's going to be really focused on getting to the ground of recognizing the prison of samsara, the nature of dukkha, the very nature of samsara. And unless we recognize that, it's really going to be very difficult to eliminate it, to take the healthy steps, to take the remedy, right? The prescription from our doctor. And here it's, he's putting it in this very skillful order. A healthy state to be achieved. Okay, so I recognize that as suffering, but I'd like this healthy state. The remedy. So we want to move to cessation, a path be known, removed, and attained and undertaken. And now this is just so foundational that I think we all know and understand, right? That you don't do a lot in your life when you're feeling well to undermine and radically change your life, right? We just don't. It's so core. We had a mindfulness meeting this morning, and there was a quote there, and so not a Buddhist quote, and I just it's dead on point to what we're talking about here, and I'll bring it up. So we're going to see this very nature within ourselves. And I'll pop it up here. This is a quote from just the mindfulness teachings that we have, which says very much the same thing. The truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. And that's from Scott Peck. And he's directly saying the same thing as Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama is saying. That for us to make deep, radical changes in our lives, we really need to recognize the need for that. We need to recognize the suffering. And so all too often, unfortunately, the path to awakening starts off with a bang because we're in pain. Right? We're suffering, we're discounted, there's got to be more. And we're willing to do something to make those changes. We're willing to explore, we're willing to seek the truer answers. And then some of that attenuates, right? We get a little better, we get some ease. And then pretty much some nice old habits pop back in. And then, that path of cessation, falls away. And so this kind of pattern within our mind stream is something that is just so endemic. I mean, I think we can all explore that, right? That unless we're uncomfortable, there's a lot of things we won't do. And a lot of times we're willing to engage in activities that make us feel better for a short time, that provide some momentary comfort at the expense of what we really want in life, right? I'll get to that tomorrow, I'll change that tomorrow, I'll just, engage in this little comforting habit for a while. And and even as I mentioned earlier, someone who likes to complain a bit, it's attenuating a bit of suffering. Even though they don't want to suffer, there's some sense of comfort and even being able to complain. And then the idea of not complaining, becomes very challenging. Funny, my question was, what would it be like to have a life without any stress, without even the inkling of frustration or a bit of anxiety? What would life be like that?
Boring.
Just plain old weird.
Yeah. And that is the interesting piece here, is that the Buddha recognized, and he thought that there was no way that that he could teach this. People couldn't grasp this way of being and the real sources of suffering. And he had to be convinced. And there was this group, there's these that he had trained with, that he thought they might be ripe enough. And this is why he started with suffering, because even me giving a very simple thing about what would your life be like without stress or anxiety, even the thought seems like, what, it might be boring. I don't know if I'd be alive. I don't know. Like, we couldn't even get it, couldn't even get it. As a matter of fact, I broached that question with a bunch of therapists and psychologists in a big conference, and some of them just think that you need it, to be okay and to be alive. And so skillfully he said, well, let's start with suffering. I think we all we all can get that, and then we can all sit there and go, well, I don't want that. But the other end of the scale is that you can exist without any of that, and the complete attenuation, annihilation of any misperceptions, because at the core, and we'll get into this more as we get into the first noble truth and the cause of it, is misunderstanding. And even a misunderstanding about our experience, that the causes for our stress, and I say this frequently, and I think it's something that is just imperative to check, to test, to explore, is there an actual stress that you can have in your life that's based in reality, that it's actual, based on something that's true? And so that's something to be explored. Is my stress, which is generally right, has to be attached to an outcome, tied to some outcome, and is that outcome somehow tied to a belief system that actually is grounded in reality? That if this were to happen, then I would be okay, then the world would be a better place, then, whatever. And if this were to happen, things would be terrible, and this would, and it would be catastrophic, or this or that. And if we explore those beliefs, is there a basis of reality to those? And the Buddhist answer at the core of this is no, absolutely not. And so the exploration, the unpacking, to recognize, to explore, and really examine what is giving rise to this belief system, that it makes me attached to an outcome in a way that creates so much stress, anxiety, or excitement about how something may or may not happen, and its impact on myself and others. Is that grounded in anything that's true? And the Buddhist answer is going to be no. And if I actually get that understanding, there's no basis, there's no cause for stress or worry or fear to arise, because there's nothing to fear. And so that begins, that's the cessation of suffering. Now, none of this is going to be anything that anyone ever says, this is true, that's true. It's let's find out, let's explore. And so he starts with something we can all start with, which is a very clear thing. I don't want to suffer. Right? And all day long, I am doing things to avoid suffering, right? All day long, I'm looking to be a little more comfortable. And so that sort of core thing. And so now he starts with, well, let's recognize the ways that we suffer. Let's identify that. And now I can diagnose the issue. And once I've diagnosed the issue, then I can recognize there's a path to eliminate this illness, right? There's a medicine, there is a remedy. And it'll get us to a place of no more suffering, of liberation, of freedom. And so here in the introduction, he's outlining that this is the journey, and he outlines that there's within cause and effect. He references the 12 links of dependent origination. He's talking about sort of the causes that lead to suffering. And within the 12 links of dependent origination, it really comes from misperception and how that leads to next link to our body, to our sensations, to how we grasp to things and so forth, and how we create this wheel of samsara. And so each of these links leads one to another into this cycle of misperception. And then he makes a point that there's also, going in reverse order, the cessation. So cause and effect leading to, and then the awakened or the enlightened understanding is that it can be undone and go in the other route. And if we sever link at that point of misperception, the whole thing falls apart. And so freedom of all of this, the 12 links that give rise to what we call samsara, the conditioned experience that we live in, gets cut through at one point and the links fall apart. But there's an undoing process. And skillfully, he starts with something we can all relate to, which is suffering. And rather than something none of us can relate to, freedom of suffering. Right? And so he's chosen it in this order. I'm going to pause there for just a moment and see if anyone has any thoughts or questions at this point here.
I have one. I have a question.
Sure.
It concerns a little bit in the introduction, a little bit kind of before what you've been talking about. He says, now when we speak of happiness in Buddhism, our understanding of it is not confined to a state of feeling. Certainly, cessation, the total cessation of suffering, is not a state of feeling, and yet we would say that cessation is the highest form of happiness because it is, by definition, complete freedom from suffering. Here again, cessation or true happiness does not come into being from nowhere or without any cause. This is a subtle point, of course, and this is what confused me. This is a subtle point, of course, because from the Buddhist perspective, cessation is not a conditioned event. So it cannot be said to be actually produced or caused by anything.
Right.
And then he goes on to say, however, actualization or attainment of cessation does depend on the path and on an individual's effort. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, we did, I made an attempt. I don't know if so last week we talked about it a bit, and this is again what we're talking about with that great degree of well-being, of freedom, of liberation. And what we would say is that cessation itself, in other words, that state of being, it's unborn. Our awareness is unborn, it's uncaused, it's beyond concept. But the cause to have cessation, your experience of cessation, is requiring effort, is requiring causes, right? So you need to actually create the causes to remove the obscurations to experience cessation, which is already there, already unborn, already unconditioned in that sense. So our very natural state before misperception is already free. There's nothing too free there. It's already there. And it's unconditioned. What's conditioned is my experience of John and the world. And so you do need to create a cause to be free of the conditioning that's limiting you from experiencing that which is unconditioned. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, and in then the path becomes the causes for awakening this Noble Eightfold Path. And that's why everything, in order to experience these things, everything is in dependence upon. So for example, we're sitting here tonight. Some of us even stuck it out through computers going up and down. And think about the myriad of causes and conditions that gave rise for us to be here tonight. I'm just going to touch on one bit of misperception that leads to suffering. So that'll be a nice thing to ponder as we prepare for getting into the truth of suffering. And it's actually inspired. I watched a little bit of a teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh, who just passed, and inspired by that. We see ourselves as very independent, right? Separate from. I'm John. I'm looking at. There's Bedford. There's Pam. There's Judy. There's Rita. Kathy. You guys are over there. I'm over here. We're very independent, right? And so the teaching that Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about was a candle being lit, right? So let's say I'll use my teacher, Geshe Gelsen, my first primary guru and teacher, Geshe Gelsen, as a candle. So he was in human form, he's a candle, right? And candle's lit, and as the candle's lit, it's kind of his life. The candle, burns down, and at some point, the candle disappears, right? And so the question is the candle gone? Is what Thich Nhat Hanh asked him. Did the candle go away? It's funny. Nobody wanted to answer. It's a trick question. But what happened to the candle, right? What happened to the candle? And so we don't see the candle. I don't see my teacher anymore. But there was a flame, right? There was heat. Heat came out of the candle. So, right. So the candle gave out light, it gave out warmth. Those things came out. People experienced that light and that warmth. And likewise, my teacher, gave teachings. He had warm thoughts. He offered compassion. That compassion went to people. People took in that compassion. People took in those teachings. It gave life to people. It had us do things and learn more and study more. It became a part of who we are and our experience. His teachers and those teachings and the people that gave birth to them, that gave life and warmth, gave off. And much of my teacher is living through me, through you, through those you touch in the very same way. The body's not there, but all the thoughts, the kindness, the actions, the activities, the Dharma centers, the people that he's touched and helped which gave rise to my life, and then all of those people that taught him, and the people that harmed those people, that gave enough suffering for them to seek truth and the path, are also a part of that experience, which are also a part of who we are and in our experience. In that way, there's no independent, John here. John is arising in dependence upon all of those that have touched me, that have cared for me, that have written words that I've read, that have made books that those written words were in. And this John that is arising in this moment is now arising in a new moment, and a new moment, and a new moment. There's no stagnant John. There's no unchanging element of John that's going moment to moment, right? I'm different, and I'm different based on the experiences. And like that candle of light that disappeared from vision, its essence has, given off into new forms, into new ways, into light and warmth to others. And those elements don't dissolve per se, right? It takes new form. And our core misperception is that I'm independent from you. And a complete misunderstanding about how interdependent we are, and how much our life is only arising in dependence upon countless others through countless times. For us to even be here in this moment, it made you choose to come to a teaching tonight instead of some other activity. And all those people that live on through you, through the care, the prayer they said for you, or the care they gave to you, or the pain they inflicted upon you, which all are a part of who you are now. And if I understood that, I don't think I'd be wishing ill so frequently. And then if I also understood that the self that's arising in this moment is not the same self that arose 2 moments ago, then who is there? What self is there to be bored? And then if I get that, I'm living in a very different world and experience, because it's pretty hard to.
That's a two-edged sword, though, isn't it, John? Because also, what self is there to be happy?
Right. That's the same point. Yeah. So that self that is experiencing happiness or suffering doesn't exist in any clear way. And eliminating that misperception of self, you'll discover the actual all-knowing, unborn, unconditioned, which is a greater, it's total free of any grasping or suffering or any conditioned sense of happiness.
And that's cessation?
Yep. And so grasping, we grasp because of the self. I want this, I don't want that. And so, again, going back to causes for cessation, well, we need to work with the conventional experience of the self that we have and make good use of it so that we can eliminate it. So that's why, we need to begin this journey where we are, not where we think we ought to be. And recognize, I've got some afflictions, I've got some preferences. There's some that are healthier than others. And so this journey in the Four Noble Truths is going to start with us as being humans, being conditioned, experiencing suffering, wanting some more well-being, and the journey of slowly and methodically recognizing that some of the things that were bringing me pleasure are actually the sources of a deeper suffering. And my anxiety and fear about certain things happening or not happening really don't hold up. I've actually survived all those, believe it or not. You've survived all your stress and worry and fear, right? You're still here doing all okay. Just checking. And yet that can be totally lost when I'm in my next anxiety and fear, right? So what we're going to do is start to ease off on that a little bit, slowly. And as we bring a little more clarity and awareness to true causes of a deeper sense of well-being, and recognizing the causes that lead me to be anxious and fearful and grasping and attached, we'll just slowly, methodically get to see and examine and explore and understand. And so that becomes the sort of the opening to this journey. And so rather than start at the point of things we can't understand, it starts at things we can understand, which is we have stress, worry, and fear in our life, right? And we have body aches and pains, and we age, and our body's not maybe what we like it to be on occasion. I noticed that today. I was doing a few push-ups going, man, how'd they get harder? But how's it wasn't this hard before? And so we start with, starting to recognize the very nature of this stress and discomfort that we experience, and learn how to actually enjoy the moments in between those discomforts in more healthy and meaningful ways, so that we can utilize the good, leisure, healthy activities of a human experience in a meaningful way to make good use of the current human birth that we have. How's that sound? Okay. I'm gonna unpin myself so I can see y'all. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. Any questions, curiosities, ponderings, inspirations? Pam, she's a hand raiser. I dig it. Okay.
Joy to be with you all. Okay, so the thought doesn't really come to me. I don't wish you to be happy. Somebody I maybe am not liking, or I'm having some discomfort with. My thought isn't, I don't want you to be happy. So can you maybe give some examples of like other things that are a little more subtle, or that we can recognize what's going on in our minds? I mean, I could come up with things like it's just maybe a negative thought of some sort, but it's not like the words don't say, I don't want you to be happy. You know what I'm saying? It's not that simple, right? It's other things.
I don't know, somebody driving past you on a freeway a little bit, cut you off or something, you might want them to get a ticket. You might want them to, get caught, right?
Right. So if I want them to get caught, I don't want them to be happy. I can just translate that in, I don't want them to be happy.
Right, you want them ill will for them.
I want ill will.
Yeah, you want them to suffer a little, right? I don't want you to be happy. I want you to suffer, right? There might be a few political figures, for example, you might not want to be very happy, right? Just saying.
In fact, yes.
Yeah. Okay, there's a pretty easy example, but very subtle ones, we can see people. And now, can you have the thought out of compassion for everyone on the highway that we hope that, law enforcement sees that person driving erratically for the benefit of all, instead of wanting that person to suffer because they're a jerk, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, and often I will say, you know, may you be free from, you know, I'll just in my mind say that. I'll just try to, you know, kind of cancel the negative thought and say, may you be free from suffering. Man, you must be suffering. May you be free. Right.
Right. Yeah. And so the quicker we can shift just our mind around that, because he will make a point down here that anger is, you know, one of the things that really destroys so much of our progress. So shifting that mind quickly if we can. But, you know, don't beat yourself up when you have it, you know, because that's the other thing, right? I have an ill will thought. And then, oh, you know, there I am. I'm so terrible. Well, now I'm creating more harmful, agitated things, right? That's so it's much more, oh, I caught myself. Woohoo, good, pat on the back. There I was being a jerk, John. You know, okay, caught that. Let's not do that. That's progress. That's not let me beat myself up. And you know, in my life, I've literally had the mantra, you know, preparing to go to a meeting. I think I've shared this before. I use a better word than I used before, but don't be a jerk, John. Don't be a jerk, John. Don't be a very healthy mantra, you know, for where I was, you know, just don't be a jerk, just reminding myself, but really coming from a place of wanting to be skillful in the interaction I'm about to have. Fortunately, I haven't had to use that mantra in a while. So, but we need to begin where we are and use things that help us and recognize that we're not Buddhas yet, and we don't need to compare where we are today to the Dalai Lama. We need to compare where we are today with how far we've come and recognize that this is a journey. As I stated, that the life and the body that we have, the experiences we have, has been conditioned by countless others. And then even as I'm wishing ill upon them, wow, look at that, our lives are very intertwined. And you know, what am I grasping to? And so this will be a journey. And so again, we're at the introduction, and next week we're going to tap right into the very core root of the truth of suffering itself. And His Holiness is just setting us up for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nope, got a hand up. All right.
So to that question about that Pam brought up, and it's been so helpful for me over this past couple of years working with you and everybody here, to when I do start to have, or actually have, ill will towards someone, perhaps a political figure, I think, but if that person were happier, then they wouldn't be so awful. And so I've kind of made a sort of funny little practice in my metta sometimes. If someone comes up like that, I'm like, may they have genuine happiness so they won't be such a jerk. Which, you know, it's helpful to think that if I know people are suffering, that's what makes them behave badly. And if they're behaving badly and I'm reacting to that, I can switch my ill will around by thinking if they were only happy, they wouldn't be such a jerk. So, but I've been, you know, lived a life of consequent. I want people to have consequences. I want them to suffer when they make other people suffer. So it's a real flipping the script for me. So very helpful.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah, along those, oh, go ahead, Rebecca. There you go. Got the hand.
Okay, yeah, I can see my hand. My question was, again, in reference to what Pam was saying and what you were saying about how everything is connected. And how would you intertwine that with what the definition of karma is? Is that connected to that cause and effect in karma?
Sure. Every movement of the mind even is creating karma. So everything is, karma is often called action, translated like that, any activity, any interaction. And so, just to put this again back in the context of, this big unfolding where our big misperception is, I think I know what would be right. Okay. It's a pretty easy perception. I think I know what would be right. And, I was thinking about any one event in our life, something that was a terrible event, we can agree on was a terrible event. I often will use the invasion of China into Tibet and, all the lives that were lost. Pretty easy to say that was a terrible event. Horrific, killed a lot of people, terrible. But at the same time, the Dalai Lama came out of Tibet, the Dalai Lama made it to India, today, we're here in part because of that invasion. And, the fact that His Holiness, is now a worldwide figure and that there's compassion institutes all over the world. So when you think about karma and cause and effect and the impacts of things and results and cause effect, things only arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. Karma is kind of is that process. And so everything in that sense is, interrelated and karmically connected. And so we're connected, like I said, to my teacher, we're connected to the invasion of China, to Tibet, to the killings of millions of Tibetans. And so sometimes what looks horrific in a moment is also unfolding in a bigger way that may save multitudes of millions of other lives in other ways that are unknowable. But my little experience of the world, things I know, what should happen. And as I mentioned frequently, I don't even know who's going to call me tomorrow. And, so I don't know how these things will turn out. And so, yeah, karma is, it can be very complicated, but it can be very simple. And I'm going to use what Suma Tenzin Palma likes to make clear with karma for yourself, because we can't always know it for the whole thing, is your motivation. What's your motivation? So going back to Pam's thing is she wants to shift her motivation from one of ill will to one of goodwill, right? And the quicker that I can shift that, the results then of that activity, of that thought, of that are going to have a different karmic imprint, ones which will be much more conducive to well-being. So as quickly as we can get to our motivation, because that is the heaviest weight of karma, that's going to matter the most. So that answer any part of your question? So, but we also need to remember that people that appear to us as negative and unhelpful or harmful even may actually be there just to help us grow in ways that we didn't know. I mean, that this is such an important point, and this is one of those misperceptions. Those people are making me suffer. Those people are waking you up. And going back to people not making big changes in their life until we suffer enough. That they'll even, when we talk about, we don't know if we're seeing a Buddha or not. Somebody appears to be human or not. We don't know. That person just annoying us as heck. Might be some manifestation showed up just at that time in a way that nudged us to make that next call or look at that next thing or, make that move in our lives. And so that's really important to remember. people that are friendly, that are nice to us, very conducive environments and very important. But we're going to be much more strongly motivated, as we've been talking about, through discomfort. The key is to be motivated in the right direction, right? Because if we're motivated to get even, then that's not very helpful. One of my favorite quotes is, the only people we should try to get even with are those who have helped us. I like that.
Om Tare Tu Tare.